on. Can we give it up for a good God? How fun is it to be a part of a church that believes in teenagers that much? Like, that's amazing. God is so good. We believe this, that the teenagers now, they're not the future church, they're the church right now. And come on, I believe that God has called us as a community, as a church, to reach 700 teenagers for the gospel who are powerfully changed, who are living outrageously, to live differently in this culture, and we're going to see a movement of teenagers. I think that's what we're called to as a church. And if we haven't met, my name is Bryan. I am the youth pastor here at this campus, and just excited that you're here this morning. I would say this: my wife's been a part of this church since 2010. I've been here since 2001. I was a teenager when I came to this church, and then just so cool to see God work through my life, and now God is working through teenagers who will do even greater things. Just 3 things I believe about youth ministry, okay? Well, 10:15 is a safe place, right? I could say this isn't my notes. I want to say it. I think for some youth pastors, they use the job as like a lily pad to be like a real pastor. You ever heard that? This is a safe place. You can say that, right? I love my job. I am so called to this. We have amazing teenagers. You watch something like that and you're like, I could do this forever. And so that's the heartbeat. And here's what I believe. One, we as youth ministry want to partner with parents. Usually, like, we as a church get to see parents and teenagers connecting. And I think the gospel, the good news, changes whole families. You hear that's 700 stories coming back to redeem families. And 2 is that I just believe we get to help as a church students grow through what they're going through. And so I just know for what a teenager's going through right now is totally different than when I was a teenager, totally different than when my parents were teenagers. And a lot of it, it's cell phones, it's technology, it's a totally changing world. And so we want to help students point their trajectory, their hearts centered in Christ, and they get to grow through what they're going through. And we have healthy adults who love Jesus, who are great moms and dads because they're a part of this church. And then 3 is just this: greater things. Jesus said it. He's like, my disciples will do even greater things. There's a guy who's been a part of this church for a long time, grew up, and then his story was kind of transformed through the church, and had a Bible, knew the Bible, and was here one Sunday and heard us say, Jesus says, greater things. And he said, I had to go home and look that up because I didn't believe it was true. He said, Jesus did say that. I looked it up. Jesus says it. It's crazy. Like, we're gonna see teenagers do even greater things, and that's what we believe is teenagers are not gonna be stuck in a bubble of just what we're doing right here, but they're gonna reach further than we could even imagine with the good news of the gospel. And so, y'all with me? Is that just I just think that's the heartbeat of our church. So cool. Middle schoolers, high schoolers. And so, hey, we're going to open up. We're in a series on love. And so if you're just kind of tuning in, about halfway mark in the series, we're in 1 Corinthians 13. So if you have a Bible, you can open that up. If you've got a digital Bible, you can pull that up. We'll also have it on the screen. And just kind of a little bit of backdrop for what we're going to be looking at is this is Paul, who's writing a letter to the church in Corinth. Church in Corinth, their culture is kind of like hyper-focused on sex, hyper-focused on themselves, hyper-focused on their careers and knowledge. Sound like a culture you might know? Paul writes a letter. I think it's totally appropriate for where we're at today, defining what love is. And I just say this: you scroll through Facebook, you watch the news, and I just think our culture's looking for love, aren't they? And I think that it starts with us pursuing love. As individuals, as a church, saying we want to be pointed, we want to be pursuing a Jesus-y kind of love. And that's what Paul writes about here, is walking us through what love looks like and is. It's a poem. Paul wrote it as a poem to this letter to this church. And here's the thing about what we're going to do today, is there's a lot of good stuff in 1 Corinthians 13. It's like the epicenter of wedding verses, right? Like, this is like, you get some noodle art on this thing, like some calligraphy. It's 1 Corinthians 13. And Wes sent me the outline. I was like, dang, you kind of gave me the bummer part. I want to be like, love believes all things, hopes all things, right? But that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to talk about what love does. We're going to talk about what love doesn't. But I do want to say this, is I believe as a culture, as especially living here in the United States, we think freedom is the ability to do whatever you want when you want. That's not freedom. Freedom needs boundaries. Love needs boundaries. I mean, look at society. Society, we need boundaries, or else we'll just be mad at each other and do horrible things to each other. You learn how to drive a car. Teenagers are like, I was just talking to a student back there, and he's like, I'm going to get my license. And here's what you need to know is the road has boundaries. It's not just a free-for-all. Art, great art needs boundaries. There's so many colors you can paint a painting with. Only so many musical notes. Things need boundaries. And I believe this, real love needs boundaries. And I don't think our culture totally knows what to do with that. And some of you might be sitting there and thinking this, Bryan, that's legalistic. Here's what I say, is boundaries aren't legalistic, they're realistic. Boundaries aren't legalistic, they're realistic. We gotta say, hey, how are we gonna love? And Paul's gonna tell us. And so I wanna open up my Bible. You know what, can I say this? When you really love your Bible, they fall apart. And so that's for you, you can have that. A well-worn Bible. All right, I'm going to start here in verse 4. We're going to actually highlight a little bit further on than that, but I'll start in 4. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wrong. It does not rejoice about injustice, and I'll just read the end here, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. This is Paul writing to the church in Corinth, and he says, this is what love isn't. Love has boundaries. Anybody ever caught a monkey? No, I just had to ask, how cool would that have been if someone shot their hand up? I've been waiting all day. I think one gathering, someone's gonna be like, maybe you've seen this before. It's the ancient tool of in the jungle, how they would catch monkeys is they would build this apparatus, it was a monkey trap, and they'd take clay and they make kind of this clay ball. Maybe you've seen them before. And they have this little hole in it. It's a couple centimeters wide. And they'd attach it to a tree or a root and lock it down. And then they'd put rice or bananas, some kind of food inside this clay trap. And what would happen is the monkeys would go and they would grab for the food, they'd put their hand through the small hole, they'd grab on, and because they clenched the food, they wouldn't be able to get out. Now, there's nothing inside the mechanics of the trap that are actually holding them in. All that monkey would have to do is simply put its hand like that, pull out, and it'd be free. But that stubborn monkey holds a grip tight to that food and won't let its hand out. Here's what I believe, there are things in our life, the Bible would call it sin, that we grab onto and we won't let go. And I believe that on the other side of that is real love, but we can't let go. And this is just kind of the key thought I wrote down for today, if you're taking notes, is that this, real love lets go. You might be a teenager in this room. And there's going to be some stuff that you're going to hear today that you're going to say, you know what? To be a great follower of Jesus, to be a great son or daughter, I'm going to have to let go. You might be a parent or a grandparent, and God's going to speak something specifically to you this morning that you're going to say, you know what? I've got to let go to experience real love. And I believe this, when we pursue real, Jesus kind of love, love flows through us. But it's going to take boundaries, and it's going to take letting go. And so all I did is this. I just took apart what Paul said here, put it into 4 things. And I want you to do this. As you take notes, will you just circle one that's for you? Holy Spirit's going to speak to you. God's going to tell you what it is. But I know there was one of these for me this week that I was like writing this message and like, okay, God, I see that. And I believe there's going to be one for you as well. And so first thing I wrote down that Paul says is this, is real love does not demand its own way. He says it right off the top. Real love doesn't demand its own way. Jesus says to have life, you've actually got to give up your own life. And we live in a society where we want to make everything about us. Maybe it's in your workplace. Maybe it's in your family. But you've seen a path where you've begun to demand your own way. When my wife and I, we talk to teenagers, I usually call it the me cyclone. That you start to say me so much, it just starts spinning all around you, and all you can see is yourself. Here's the thing, I think for our culture, it's a blind spot. And there's actually got to be the boundaries to say, you know what, I can't demand my own way. I'm going to make it about others. It's what Jesus did, right? It wasn't about it was, may your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And so for maybe you just sitting here, the boundary that you need is you're going to say, it's not my own way. Second thing Paul says is this, he says real love is not irritable. And that was the one this week that, boy, did God do a number on me. Coming back from summer camp, you're tired. I mean, as a leader, you're tired, right? And I was exhausted. And I was in the car with my wife, and I think she goes, man, You are grumpy. Now there's two types, I want to step back. There's two types of grumpy. One type of grumpy is the grumpy where you say, no, I'm not grumpy. Husbands, am I the only one who've experienced that one? Okay, I would like to suggest that there's a further level to grumpy. Here's the level I was at. Was the level that you say, I know, I don't want to live with myself. I'm scared for my safety. She's like, you're so grumpy. I was like, I know, I don't want to be in this car either. Who is this person? It's grumpy. Love is not real. Love is not irritable. Now, here's the hard thing, is there's going to be moments and people who are around you that like, you're just going to be irritable. Like, it's just it's going to happen. There's going to be moments where you're like, in the original text, you look and like maybe some of your Bible says, it says, love is not easily provoked. It's interesting as you take the Greek and you translate it, the pretty like straightforward translation is love is not provoked. They slipped in that easily because it just sounded like a bar that we could reach, right? Love is not provoked. I wonder for how many of us this week we feel like we've been provoked. Here's what I know. You can be irritated, but you're not irritable. Teenagers, there's just gonna be a moment where like with your parents or with your family members, like you're gonna be irritated. And like there's the clearest moment is like probably with your family. I don't know, I'm just gonna say like grandmas and grandparents, you're amazing because my wife and I this year, we hosted our first all-family holiday. And I don't know if we're just young and stupid, but we did the 4th of July at our house, and here's what we did. We said my family, my extended family, my sister, Kayla's family, all of them at our house. And we just thought this was a fun idea. We're like, hey, let's do breakfast through dinner. It's a kind of all-day thing. Kind of 9 to 5 adventure we went on. It was like a bed and breakfast we were running. Like people are there at 9, you're like, oh my gosh, they're not gonna leave. Like the cool thing, you go to grandma's house and you're just like, eat some pie, shake some hands, play a board game, and I'm gone. When it's at your house, like I don't know how, we didn't know what we were doing. There was one moment, we were standing in the kitchen, we didn't even talk. We just made that, you know that husband-wife eye contact? Where it's like, it's both like, what did we get ourselves into? And like all at once, you're like, we're drowning. I was so irritated at moments, and by moments, I mean the whole time. There was a family member I had to go like run to get ice, and I'm like on my cell phone, and I'm standing on our dock, on the lake, and people are in the yard, and it's the 4th of July. I love fireworks, by the way, until they're at your house, and you're like, no, we're not burning my house down. Go to the neighbor's house. I'm talking to our family member, I'm on the dot, and just like, I'm telling them direction, and then, bloop. I didn't even get in the water, I just like looked. And I looked at the yard, and I was like, this is all your fault. I said some unpastored things in my head. I just know this, that like, can I say this? That again, this isn't legalistic, this is just realistic. God's like, we're not gonna be irritable. You're gonna set your heart on a trajectory. And I'll tell you this, when you pursue real love, there's gonna be moments where you're irritated, but you're not irritable. I had to take a pause moment. I had to pull out of the game for a second and just say, okay, God, reset my heart. Like, let me serve. Teenagers, I'll tell you this, if you serve your parents, it'll change your trajectory. Parents, I'll just say this. One of the hardest things, you probably remember it from when you were teenagers, is when your parents won't admit when they're wrong. There might be a moment this week that you say, you know what, like, I'm sorry, I got irritated and I was wrong. Okay, third thing, I told you this message wasn't gonna be there's a next week, come on. Love believes all things, hopes all things. Okay, 3, love does not keep a record of wrong. Here's what I know, is we have a scoreboard in our minds that we keep. Just the place I think we keep it the most is the workplace. You know, Karen from accounting sent me an email, and I know what she was saying, but there was sass in the undertow of that message. 2 points docked for her. Roger from HR, I had 3 Diet Cokes in the fridge, and there's only 2. I know it was Roger. 2 points docked for him. No, we do this. Like, we have an internal scoreboard that we keep right and wrong. Maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's a family member. You give points, you take points away, and we have kind of this ticker in our head. And Paul's like, get rid of it. That's not Jesus stuff. Paul's writing to this church. This church is like a Jesus movement that's happening in this like chaotic city. And he's like, listen, you're going to be different. I just think for us as a church, we're called to be people that live different. Our families are going to be different. We're not going to have a scoreboard. Love doesn't keep a record of wrong. Maybe today the thing you're going to let go is like a deep record of wrong that people that have hurt you. And it's going to be a process, and it's going to take some time, but you're going to start here and just say, okay, God, I got to give this one to you. I got to give this one to you because I'm not going to keep a record. There's this verse in Exodus. It's Exodus 34:6. And when you go home, I would read it. Take some time this week and read it. But it's actually the verse that's the most quoted verse in the Bible by the Bible. It's a moment where God gives his name to Moses. God actually doesn't just give his name, he gives his whole character. He says, this is who I am. He says, I'm not just any God. I'm not a wood carving. I'm a God who has a name and a personality, and it's not like anything you've ever seen. Exodus 34, he says this. I think it's going to come up on the screen, but he says, my name is Yahweh the Lord, the God of compassion and mercy. I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. If you're new to church, you don't know who God is, here's who God is. But I'm slow to anger. The literal translation in the Hebrew, what God is literally saying there is I have long nostrils. I'll give you an example. You know that moment where you pause and you got some of y'all moms, you got great long nostrils. You're like, boy, you bring out those middle names. God says, I am slow to anger. May we be people of God who are slow to anger, and may we cut the scoreboard. May we cut the scoreboard and keep no record of wrong. Fourth thing is this, is love does not rejoice about injustice. Now, I gotta tell you, I struggled with this one this week. Here's why, is like, I feel like I'm a pretty good person. I feel like a lot of us here, probably sitting here, I don't think I spend a lot of time celebrating injustice. I don't think, honestly, like maybe you're sitting here and you're like, no, Bryan, I get that. The Holy Spirit speaking to me. I know exactly what that is. I just would say for most of us, like that's just not a moment that connects to our story. But then like, I think God spoke, and here's where I think it does. I think we do celebrate injustice. And I think we celebrate injustice in our entertainment. And again, I gotta say this, like I almost scratched this out of my notes because I'm like, this sounds legalistic, but this isn't legalistic, this is realistic. This is good. We set good boundaries on our hearts. We guard our hearts. And I was watching a show on Netflix. I'm kicking back with my wife, and we're watching this show recently. And my wife turns to me and she's like, man, if middle school girls, just like, if we watch this with them, would you feel like we were discipling well? I just paused. And again, I don't want to say, like, I'm not going to tell you what to watch, what not to watch, but I will say there are moments when we, in our entertainment, where we celebrate injustice. Where we see things on the screen and we say, that's not of Jesus, that's not what Jesus would do, and we celebrate it. And I was going to say, like, if we're going to be people that are different, I don't know what that looks like for you specifically, but I will say, guard your heart. Don't celebrate injustice. Paul's saying, like, there's going to be boundaries on love. It's not legalistic. I was talking to someone recently, they're like, man, I don't go to church, it's just a bunch of rules. It's just a bunch of rules if you don't have a relationship. My wife and I, we're married. Are there rules to our marriage? Absolutely, but it's because we have a relationship. This is what love is. Real love is a relationship with a God who didn't stay up there but came down here. The 10 Commandments, kind of like the big moment of rules in the Bible. Like you read them, there are a bunch of rules. They're really good rules. Do not murder. I love to keep that one. This isn't legalistic, this is realistic. And I think we can kind of fall into two categories in a message like this. One category is maybe in our own heart, we look at just like what Paul's saying here, and what we do is maybe as a parent or a teenager, a grandparent, or just a follower of Jesus, we kind of measure ourselves up against it, and we say like, I'm not there. We feel guilt of like, man, Bryan, if I could tell you my irritability stories from this week. Or the other place we fall into is maybe we fall into this place where we look at it and we're like, yeah, this message is for so-and-so. Maybe you're like nudging your husband the whole time. Or you're like, man, if I could show this to I wish my kid was here. They need to hear this. And we like push it off ourselves. I don't know if you're like me, but growing up, it was at my parents' house. Maybe I was talking to some of you in the lobby. It was in your grandparents' house, but you had a marker. You stand up against the wall, and maybe, you know, as a kid, you stand up against it, you get your back straight, and then my mom would take a pencil and she'd marker, and then you look, right, and like go a little bit taller, and you like, wow, that was me when I was, you know, that age. You go, am I the only one that had one of those? Anybody else have the marker where you like measure yourself against the wall? So I wanted to show you guys a picture. I was like, I gotta find a picture. So I'm like calling my mom. I'm like looking, see if I could find a picture of mine so I could show it to you. I couldn't find a picture. But then I remembered that my parents live local, so I just ripped the door off the frame and brought it. And this is it. I had the same one growing up. There's April 2nd, 1988. That was the day I was born. I think a great aunt brought this to my mom. 2.5 years old right there. 7 years old. Kind of went off the charts here. 20 years old. Mom would put me up against that and draw the little line. Here's what I believe, is we got a good Father in heaven. We got a good dad in heaven. And I don't think we have a God that looks at us when it comes to our love, that measures us up and says, do better. Because what does every parent say when you stand up against that wall and you're 7 years old? My mom didn't say, Bryan, get taller. She said, look at how big you've gotten. Look how tall you've gotten. I just think you have a God who looks at you and you're standing up here on this immeasurable scale of love, of real love. And does he see your potential? Absolutely. He sees that in eternity, you're going to be boundless, unleashed, full of love. But not right now, right here, now you're here. And God just looks at you and says, look how tall you've gotten. You used to be here, messy, broken. You used to be here, now you're up here. May you know that you have a God who's a good Father, who sees you right where you're at, who sees your Jesus-y love that's just inside of you, that generosity that's inside of you, that unleashed spirit to see others' lives changed inside you. He says, look how big you've gotten. Don't measure yourself against other people. Don't take your scale and put it on others. Look at you. You've gotten so big. It's probably a moment for you where you've got something that you need to let go. What I did is I asked a student and one of our leaders from summer camp to share their moment at summer camp of real love, of what God called them to let go of and how God is changing their story. So you give it up for my friend Travis and Annika.
Imagine you're in a hurricane, but you can't move. And everything you've known, everything that you loved, is just being torn out from under you. And all you can do is sit and watch this horrible event. Have you ever felt alone? Ever felt like no one was with you? Ever felt like God hasn't cared? Now, it was normal Tuesday night. I had gotten out of school, finished my studies, and I was off to soccer practice. But little did I know that Tuesday night, a year and a half ago, would change my life forever. I was playing soccer and I lunged out for a ball too far, and I tore my tendon in my left leg. When I was injured, I was so lost. My foundation wasn't soccer. My community wasn't soccer. My identity was soccer. And it was all torn out from under me. I felt like I was in a hurricane, everything flying past me, but I couldn't do anything at all. I was torn mentally and physically. Everyone was moving on with their lives, but I was still stuck in the hurricane and I didn't know where to go. I remember screaming out to God, why? Why haven't you healed me? But all I would get in return is silence. And in the silence and the lonely times, that's when the voices change in your head. The voices that used to be God cheering me up, but then it changed to the voices that said, you're not good enough. Maybe if God loved you, he would have healed you. Now it's summer camp, And these voices in the back of my head have just been playing on repeat for so long. And all I want to know is that God still cares. I feel like the storm is at its climax. It's Wednesday night, and David Day and Kayla Lindgren are speaking. These voices are still playing in the back of my head. So I yelled out to God, "Why? What do you want me to do with my life?" But this time I got a reply. He simply said, "Look up." So I did, and I looked around me, and I saw my friends that are like my family. And then I found out my purpose. My purpose was to show God's love and to bring joy to other people no matter what the circumstances. And I have a photo. It's going to come up here in a second. This is my friend Josh. And Josh, I see you. Can you stand up? Now, Josh, we met 4 years ago through soccer, of course. And I fought for him for an entire year to get him to summer camp. And so 3 years ago, Wednesday night, Josh said yes to Jesus. And I was praying over him. But now fast forward 3 years later. Now, it's Wednesday night at summer camp, and Josh is praying over me. If I wouldn't have gotten injured, I wouldn't have been able to take the time to invest into Josh. And we would have never had that moment. God used my injury for his glory, because if it's not good, God's not done. But now, did you know that in the eye of the hurricane, everything is still, and you can see the blue skies up above? This summer camp was the eye of the storm for me. It allowed me to find my way back home. It allowed me to move. But the eye of the hurricane only lasts for an instant. Now, as soon as I got back home, that hurricane started back up again. But this time, I can move and I know where I'm going. Now I want to ask you something. What's your hurricane? What's that thing that you're so stuck on and you have no way how to get out? And now what's your eye of the storm? The thing that's going to help you get out. Thank you.
It was my first year being a leader at summer camp. And I'm going to be honest, I was discouraged and doubtful on how God was going to be able to use me. My past was messy. But I listened to what God was telling me, so I go to camp. I get there and I have a room full of girls that I don't know at all. At first, it was a little awkward, but I clicked with them later at dinner. I was comfortable. But then later that night, a girl asks if 2 of her friends could join our room. And then suddenly I was faced with an option. I could try and... I'm sorry. I was faced with an option. I could stay in my comfort zone, or I could try and juggle 10 middle school girls by myself. I knew that there was a reason God wanted them in my room, so I said yes. I stretched for a special moment with these girls. I was trying to see why God wanted them in my room. Monday night, there was nothing. Tuesday night, there was nothing. Wednesday night, there was nothing. So Thursday, I gave up. I stopped trying. I figured if God wanted us to have a moment, it would happen naturally. Later that night, I'm sitting in the room with 2 of our girls, and she asks to hear my story. For those of you who don't know, a large part of my story was how I was cyberbullied on an anonymous website. I look up after I finished sharing, and one of the girls was quiet. I could tell that I said something that had bothered her, so immediately I apologized. But she stops me and she asks if she could show me something. She pulls up her phone, and on her screen were messages that she was receiving on an anonymous website. As tears streamed down my face, as I read these hateful comments, memories flooded back. I wiped the tears away and become the person I wish I had when I was going through my situation. I told her that she wasn't alone, and I was able to read the messages to her and deny them. I was able to physically point at the word worthless and tell her that it was a lie. I was able to tell her she was made in God's image for a specific purpose. While the world was tearing her apart, I was able to build her up. This student tells me how before camp, she was on the line not knowing if God was real. But then after hearing how God changed my life and how we connected through this situation, she told me she no longer had doubt. She said she now knew God was real. God is going to use your story to connect with other people. Yes, your past might be messy, but God is going to turn your mess into a message. Your hurt will never go to waste. Trust God.
Jesus says to his disciples, listen, this is how you're gonna know you're my disciple. It's by how you love one another. God is doing something so powerful in our church. He's changing stories. He wants to change yours. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, like, you're gonna be perfect the way God's perfect. And I love this the way that author C.S. Lewis puts it. I think we have this quote. He says this, that, he says, be perfect. Do you have that quote? He says this, he says, the command, be perfect, is not idealistic, nor is it a command to do the impossible. He is going to make us into the creatures that can obey that command. God is turning us into creatures of real love. And so at camp, we just had a moment where we sang this one song. It was kind of an anthem for camp. It says, take courage. It says that God is in the waiting. And I asked a team of our students, they're going to sing this song. They're going to lead us in worship. They're going to be brave by just engaging us in this moment of worship. And when you do this, we're going to say seated as a moment of reflection. Maybe you're going to just have a moment where you say, God, what is it I'm letting go? Where is it that I need to connect to your real love?